Hi everyone, my name is Deborah Stine. I am a professor of the practice in engineering and public policy and associate director for policy outreach at the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation at Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome to this lecture answering the question, how should you develop your policy analysis question? In this lecture, we'll explore why a neutral policy analysis question is important, identify the key elements of a neutral policy analysis question, and discuss the differences between a good and poor policy analysis question.
There are many definitions for policy analysis. We will use that at the Dictionary of Public Administration, which defines policy analysis as a systematic and data-based alternative to intuitive judgment about the effects of policy or policy options. In this video, we're going to talk about the first step in the policy analysis process described in an earlier video, defining the problem as a neutral question. Although we all have biases, it's important to set those biases aside when conducting a policy analysis, so we rely less on our intuition and more on a qualitative and quantitative analysis of a potential societal challenge. Whether you're working for a government agency or an advocacy organization or a firm, it is important for a policymaker to fully understand the implications of a policy action from all perspectives to make the optimal policy decision for society as a whole. You may have heard about the Keystone XL Pipeline. This pipeline would begin in Canada and join existing pipelines to bring oil from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. The concern about the Keystone XL Pipeline addressed in this report from the State Department is the impact it might have on the environment. Because the pipeline crosses international borders, the decision as to whether or not the pipeline can be constructed falls on the President, who delegated that authority to the Secretary of State. Now imagine you were a policy analyst working for the President of the United States, and Congress is considering a bill that would allow the pipeline to be built regardless of any decision made by the Secretary of State. How would you approach analysis? What question would you attempt to answer? Pause the video and write down the question you would answer. Welcome back. We're now going to go through some examples of good and poor question phrasing. Do you think this is a good policy analysis question or a poor one? Pause the video, take a look at the question, and see what you think. Hopefully you said it was a poor question. Why? First, because the question is not a neutral one. It presumes the Keystone XL Pipeline should be stopped, and that is the only possible policy action. So it includes the answer in the question when your goal in an analysis is to answer a question based on a neutral analysis of the facts. It also accepts the causal claim that the best way to protect the environment is stopping the Keystone XL Pipeline. However, do we really know that is the best decision? Is a pipeline less damaging to the environment than current methods of transporting the oil by truck and rail? We don't know that based on the facts presented thus far. Also, are there other considerations that are also important for the President to consider, such as job creation and energy security? By limiting the question to the environment, we are focusing on only one societal goal. The President, though, must consider many factors. The question might be more appropriate in this sense for the head of the Environmental Protection Agency than the President. So what this means is that we need to iterate the question as we gather more information so it is more nuanced and consider who is a client for the analysis. Another challenge with this version of the question is that it does not state who the client is. If the policy analysis is for the President, there are certain policy actions within his control, such as executive orders. But he can't pass a law all by himself. That needs congressional action. Think about the question another way. What if this analysis was being conducted for the Canadian Prime Minister? Would an analyst be answering the same question? No, probably not. Now, this is a good version of the question. First, it does not assume there is a problem. It instead presents the situation at hand, the expectation that Congress will approve a bill. Second, it does not presume that there will be any action. By putting if any in the question, it is clear that no action is a viable option. In reality, that is the most common situation. Third, the question includes a client, so it is clear what policy options are possible. This table from the State Department illustrates how intuitive analysis does not always provide a full understanding of a situation. As shown in this chart, the total annual direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions for the no-action scenarios range from 28 to 42% greater than that for the proposed Keystone XL pipeline. Now, is that a full understanding of the environmental implications of the situation? No. For example, the proposed pipeline has now been rerouted to avoid concerns about ecological damage in the Sound Hills of Nebraska. But it does give some indication of why it is important to understand the current situation as part of a policy analysis and to remain neutral by bringing together all the data available. In addition, it is important to understand the different sides of the issue. According to a Congressional Research Service analysis, which provides policy analysis for Congress, proponents of the pipeline cite societal benefits such as increasing the diversity of the U.S. petroleum supply and economic benefits, including job creation. Opponents of the pipeline focus on greenhouse gas emissions associated with the development of Canadian oil sands, continued U.S. dependence on fossil fuels, and the risk of a potential release of heavy crude. So here are some key principles in developing a neutral policy analysis question. First, do not assume there is a problem. Second, do not include the solution, the policy option that might ultimately be recommended in your problem question. Third, do not easily accept causal claims. Rarely is there a linear relationship. Do iterate your problem question as your knowledge and understanding increases, and do make the client for your policy analysis clear in your question. Here is another example of a good policy analysis question. It has the if any phrase, so no additional policy actions are presumed. The client is clear, and that client is linked to the societal outcome of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The question is specific. It is clear that this analysis is focused on companies, as opposed to, say, mobile sources, producing greenhouse gas emissions, as opposed to other kinds of emissions from air or water, as well as the source of those emissions and the location. So pause the video, take a moment to look at this question to make sure you fully understand each of the different parts of a good policy analysis question. Here is another good example. It illustrates a situation when the client is not part of the question, as the focus is not on personal action, but on action that can be taken by the federal government. The client interest is clear through the description. However, as the Great Lakes are both related to the policymaker state and the individual is chair of a committee that has jurisdiction and interest related to the issue. Now pause the video and take a look at this question. What would you change about it? The challenge here is the vagueness of the question. First, is this about fisheries anywhere in the world? Probably not, as NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, does not have jurisdiction over all those waters, but probably only a few miles offshore from the United States. Second, are these freshwater or saltwater fisheries? If they are in lakes, the issue is probably more of a state than a national issue. Third, how is wasted catch defined? Probably more specificity is needed. In summary, conducting a policy analysis in response to a neutral policy analysis question is important, so policymakers have the information they need to make the optimal policy decisions relative to society goals. The key elements of a neutral policy analysis question is not presuming there's a problem or that action will be taken. A good policy analysis question keeps the client in mind and does not include solutions in the policy question or easily accept causal claims. In the end, it is always important to keep in mind that policy analysts do not dictate policy, as there are often considerations beyond the policy analysis that influence policymaker decision-making. In addition, policy analysis often lacks the data and information needed to develop an optimal analysis.
Thank you for watching, and I encourage you to watch the other videos in this series.